And no disrespect to Mat Armstrong, I think he's doing amazing things. He's a great guy and all of that. Can't do that in a garage. There's just a few places in the world with the right equipment and only a few people in the world with the right training to be able to do that.
A Bugatti Chiron Pur Sport, one of only 60 ever built, was declared a total loss by a technician Bugatti flew in from France specifically to say so. The VIN was locked. No authorized dealer on earth would sell parts for it. The CEO of Bugatti himself made a public video explaining why an independent repair simply could not be done safely. And then, Mat Armstrong split the car in half using a rolling base salvaged from a workshop bin. That is where this story is right now. Not in theory, in reality. The car has been started. The gearbox mount has been welded back together. And the conversation that began as a debate about whether Mat should attempt this has quietly become something else entirely. How a crashed Bugatti ended up in a Miami workshop. The car that started all of this belongs to Alex Gonzalez, a Miami-based content creator who crashed his own Bugatti Chiron Pur Sport during a stunt. What followed was a standard insurance process with a deeply unstandard outcome. The insurer wrote the car off, paid Alex out, and the Chiron landed on Copart, the salvage auction platform where totaled vehicles go to be picked over. Alex bought it back himself for around $1,900,000, a steep discount from the $4 to $4.5 million. These cars typically command when they are intact and road legal. That gap between what he paid and what the car is worth in one piece is essentially what the entire rebuild is about. If Mat Armstrong can return this Chiron to a functioning road-legal state, the financial logic of the project makes sense. If he cannot, Alex has spent nearly $2 million on a very expensive sculpture. The damage itself was serious from the start. The front end had taken the full force of the crash, deployed airbags, cracked carbon fiber panels, destroyed headlights, and a heavily compromised front structure. Bugatti flew a technician from their headquarters in Molsheim, France, to inspect the car in person. That technician declared it a total loss. The repair estimate Bugatti quoted for a factory restoration came in at approximately $1,700,000 in parts alone, before any labor was factored in. Alex declined that offer, partly on cost grounds and partly, as he later explained, out of concern that once the car was inside Bugatti's facility in France, the bill would keep climbing and the car might never come back. So he called Mat Armstrong instead. And that decision set off a chain of events that has pulled in the CEO of one of the most exclusive car companies on the planet, generated tens of millions of views across multiple episodes, and turned a salvage auction purchase into the most scrutinized independent hypercar rebuild in the history of automotive YouTube. The moment Bugatti locked the door. What elevated this story from an interesting rebuild project into something genuinely unprecedented was a single corporate decision. After Alex bought the car back and the intention to rebuild it independently became clear, Bugatti locked the car's vehicle identification number. In practical terms, that meant no authorized Bugatti dealer anywhere in the world would sell replacement parts for this specific car. Not headlights, not trim, not mechanical components, nothing. It was a move that immediately reframed the rebuild from a technical challenge into something with a much sharper edge to it. Mat and Alex were not just dealing with a complicated car, they were dealing with a manufacturer that had actively made the job harder from the outside. And that corporate decision had an unintended consequence that Bugatti's communications team almost certainly did not anticipate. It made the story infinitely more interesting to watch. Then, Mat Armstrong stepped in directly. The CEO of Bugatti posted a public video on Instagram addressing the situation, and the tone of it was careful, respectful toward Mat as a creator, but firm on the substance. Armstrong explained that the Chiron Pur Sport was not just a complicated car in the way that any modern performance vehicle is complicated. The crash had shattered the gearbox housing and caused structural damage to the carbon fiber monocoque, the single-piece tub that forms the structural spine of the entire car. These were not panel repairs or cosmetic fixes. He raised genuine safety concerns about what could go wrong if the repairs fell short of factory standards, pointing out that the consequences of a structural failure in a car capable of over 200 miles per hour were not abstract. He also addressed the parts situation directly, clarifying that some of the figures being quoted online for Bugatti components were inaccurate. And he made the point that the car was welcome at the Molsheim factory if Alex changed his mind about the private rebuild route. The door, Rimek said, remained open. Mat's response came quickly. He acknowledged that the CEO of Bugatti watching his videos and making a response to them was, in his own words, completely mental. But he made his position clear too. He was not looking for a fight with Bugatti. He was looking for parts at a price that did not make the project financially absurd, and he was not prepared to send the car to France because Alex was not prepared to send it to France. So the rebuild would continue, with or without official support. The garbage bin that embarrassed a factory. Here is the detail that traveled furthest on social media and probably best captures what this rebuild has come to represent. When the time came to separate the front carbon tub from the rear drivetrain section of the Chiron, a procedure Bugatti's CEO had said required specialized equipment available at only 2 facilities in the entire world. Mat Armstrong and his father built a support rig using a standard 2-post workshop lift and the rolling base from a workshop bin. Scrap materials, things that were already in the garage. It worked. The front and rear halves of the Bugatti Chiron Pur Sport separated cleanly. The reason this moment landed so hard was not just that it undermined Bugatti's claim about proprietary equipment. It was the visual of it, a multi-million-pound hypercar resting on improvised supports made from whatever was lying around the workshop floor, being gently coaxed apart by a British YouTuber and his dad. It was the most unlikely image the automotive internet had seen in years, and it proved a point that Mat had been making quietly throughout the whole project. Someone built this car, which means someone else can take it apart. What the split revealed underneath was both better and worse than expected. The crash had pushed the engine forward with enough force to crush a coolant pipe and leave pressure marks in areas where you really do not want to see pressure marks on a 2-million-pound machine. The gearbox housing had taken damage, and the cast aluminium engine and gearbox mounting support, the structural component responsible for locating the entire drivetrain within the car, had broken on both sides. The breaks were serious enough that when the car was still together, nobody had been quite sure what they were looking at. With the car split open, it was suddenly very clear. The better news was that the main engine block itself appeared to have come through without catastrophic damage. That single fact changed the complexion of the whole project. A destroyed Bugatti engine is not something you repair in a workshop. It is something that ends a rebuild series in the most expensive way possible. The engine being intact, battered and shunted but intact, meant there was still a path forward. It was just a path that ran directly through that broken mounting support, and nobody could order a replacement one. The weld that the whole project rested on. With no replacement part available, and Bugatti not selling anything to this project at the time, the broken cast aluminium mounting support went to a specialist, a machinist Mat referred to simply as Bob, someone who had worked on previous Armstrong builds and had never, by Mat's account, let the team down. The first question Bob had to answer was not how to fix the part. It was whether the part could be fixed at all. Cast aluminium is not always weldable. The alloy composition matters enormously, and if the magnesium content is too high, a TIG weld will not hold. It was a genuine unknown going into the assessment, and the episode that covered this moment was honest about the uncertainty in a way that made it genuinely tense to watch. Bob checked the material, confirmed it was weldable, and got to work. The weld held. More than that, the repair was reinforced beyond the original specification, with additional material laid in around the weakest areas. Mat raised a point here that was worth sitting with. There is a real engineering argument that Bugatti designed this mount to be the deliberate weak point in the drivetrain, a component engineered to fail first in a crash, absorbing energy and directing the forces away from more expensive and less replaceable parts. If that is true, then making the mount stronger than original might shift where a future impact would cause damage. Mat acknowledged this openly, without pretending he had a factory-level answer to it. He was making a judgment call in the absence of the technical documentation that only Bugatti holds, and he said so. What also emerged during this phase was a detail that delighted the internet and slightly undermined the mythology around Bugatti's engineering exclusivity. The starter motor on the Chiron Pur Sport shares a part number with a Volkswagen Group application, specifically a 1.9 TDI diesel unit, a $4 million hypercar with the same starter motor as a family hatchback. The Volkswagen Group's ownership of Bugatti has always been an open secret, but seeing it expressed in a specific shareable part number gave the internet something concrete to point at. Once the repaired mount went back on the car, the reassembly began moving at a pace that surprised even Mat. Parts went back where they belonged. The front and rear halves came back together, joined by the 14 titanium bolts that hold the two sections of the Chiron's structure as one. A bolt was snapped during torquing, the wrong figure applied to one of the differently sized fasteners tucked underneath. The broken piece was extracted, a replacement was ordered, and the work continued. Valvetronic fabricated a custom exhaust system for the car while the rear was apart, giving the Chiron a deeper, slightly more aggressive note than the standard setup. The key turns, and then the fuel leaks. The moment the entire series had been building toward arrived without much ceremony. With the car back together, the electronics reconnected, the fuel and coolant lines reattached, and the custom exhaust in place, Mat and Alex turned the key. The Bugatti started. First attempt. On a car that had been declared a total loss, split in half in a workshop, had its structural engine mount welded back together by a specialist with no factory data to work from, and reassembled without any official support from the manufacturer that built it. That moment shifted the entire conversation around the project. For the first time, the question was no longer whether Mat had the nerve to attempt something this ambitious. The question had moved on to whether he could actually finish it. Those are very different questions, and the second one is considerably harder to answer. The custom exhaust, it turned out, was not the dramatic transformation people expected. The sound was deeper and slightly louder than stock, but it was not the night and day shift that a custom exhaust on a more conventional car might produce. Bugattis are extraordinary machines in almost every measurable sense, but they have never been celebrated for their exhaust note, and the Chiron Pur Sport was not about to reinvent that reputation through an aftermarket system. Then the fuel leak appeared. Roughly moments into the first start celebration, fuel began dripping from underneath the car. It turned out to be a fuel line that had simply come loose during reassembly, rather than any kind of deeper failure, the kind of problem that is irritating rather than catastrophic. The team sorted it, restarted the car, and got the answer to the next question on the list. The Chiron selected a gear. The engine and gearbox were communicating with each other as a functioning drivetrain for the first time since the crash. It was also around this point that Bugatti's position began to shift. After Alex had threatened publicly to manufacture replacement components using three-dimensional printing technology, a move that was partly a negotiating tactic and partly a genuine expression of frustration, Rimac reached out directly. The parts blacklist was eventually lifted. Bugatti reduced their repair estimates from the original figures. The relationship between the workshop in Miami and the factory in Molsheim moved from outright opposition to something closer to a cautious, arm's-length acknowledgement that the project was happening and was not going away. That shift matters for what comes next. Because the car, starting in a workshop, and the car being genuinely road-ready are two entirely different things. And the distance between those 2 points is still significant. What winning actually looks like from here. Starting is not finishing. Mat has been clear about this himself, and the list of remaining work is long enough to keep the project going for several more episodes at minimum. The cooling system is the most immediate concern. The Chiron was driven without coolant at some point, before Mat got involved, not briefly, but for a meaningful distance. On a previous project, a similar situation resulted in a damaged water pump seal that showed no symptoms in a workshop but announced itself dramatically on the road. A car sitting in a workshop idling for 2 minutes is not a reliable indicator of cooling system health. The radiators at the front of the car still need proper attention as part of the ongoing front-end structural and body repairs. And until the coolant is fully in the system and the car is brought up to proper operating temperature, the full picture of what the crash did to the cooling circuit remains incomplete. There is also the water pump itself to consider. If the seals were compromised during the period the car ran dry, the symptoms may not surface until the engine is under real load. That is the kind of problem that does not announce itself conveniently. Then there is the front of the car itself, which still carries the unresolved structural and body damage from the original impact. The rear may be alive. The engine may be running. The gearbox may be selecting gears. But the front is still a work in progress, and until that work is complete, the Chiron is not going anywhere on a public road. This is also where the part availability question becomes interesting again. With the blacklist lifted and Bugatti's position softened, the availability of official components for the front-end repairs is no longer the absolute wall it was at the start. Whether the economics of using genuine Bugatti parts versus fabricating or sourcing alternatives still makes sense is a calculation that only Matt and Alex can run. But the option now exists in a way it did not for most of this project. The carbon fiber elements alone, panels, structural sections, anything that took direct impact force, represent a category of repair that cannot be improvised the way a metal bracket can. Carbon fiber either has its integrity or it does not, and assessing that properly requires equipment and expertise that goes beyond a standard workshop setup. Beyond the physical repairs, there is the deeper question of long-term function. Getting a car started is one milestone. Getting it to drive cleanly, hold operating temperature, manage boost pressure correctly, shift through all its gears without fault codes, and behave like a Chiron Pur Sport should behave in normal use. That is the real test. The sensor positions in the repaired engine mount, the gearbox pressures, the calibration of systems that were disconnected and reconnected without access to factory diagnostics. All of these are unknowns that only road time and real-world testing will answer. What makes this project genuinely significant, beyond the spectacle of it, is what it represents for the relationship between independent builders and car manufacturers. Bugatti started this saga with a locked VIN, a public statement from its CEO, and the institutional weight of one of the most exclusive brands in automotive history behind it. Mat Armstrong started it with a workshop, a team of people who know how to solve problems without a manual, and several million subscribers watching every move. By the time the car first started, Bugatti had lifted the blacklist, reduced their estimates, and the CEO had moved from a firm public no to something considerably more open. That shift did not happen because Bugatti suddenly changed its principles. It happened because the pressure of a watching audience, a determined builder, and a car that refused to stay dead created a situation the manufacturer could no longer simply ignore from a distance. Whether the car eventually passes a road test and gets driven properly is still an open question. But the question the automotive world was asking when this started, can Mat Armstrong actually do this, has already been answered in ways that nobody at Bugatti headquarters in Molsheim would have predicted when they flew a technician to Miami to declare that car a total loss. So here is what we want to know from you. Do you think Mat Armstrong is going to get this Bugatti properly road legal? Or does the cooling system, the front-end structure, and the long-term unknowns mean the project eventually hits a wall it cannot climb? Drop your answer below and tell us this. Was Bugatti right to push back, or did they handle this whole situation badly from the start? If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. For more interesting stories like this, be sure to click on the next video that pops up on your screen. You never know what you'll discover next.